Outstanding. Well, welcome. Welcome, my friends, to the inaugural episode. The inaugural episode of Stories from the Driveway, my grandfather. So, bit of a departure. Most of you know me, no boring training, content to help deal with the corporate learning crisis. Today, we're going to take a complete departure from that. And I want to start sharing a little bit about my grandfather. Now, I had a deep connection with my grandfather. I revered the man. I found him to be an inspiration. He taught me so much over his very long life, 97 years, and passed along a lot of wisdom. Now, along the way, this may surprise you, my friends, I'm kind of an idiot. So it took me a lifetime to actually learn these lessons and understand these lessons. And many of the things he's told me, I'm still learning the lessons, but a lot of this knowledge and wisdom in his experiences, I think are not only interesting, but can be very helpful to us as we navigate the challenges of life. So I hope by starting this sort of little side passion project, number one, you'll get some inspiration, you'll get some ideas, you'll get some new approaches to life. Number two, you'll get a sense of how amazing my grandfather was. And thirdly, that we can connect together a little bit deeper on a personal level. So I'm so excited to kick off these stories from the driveway. My grandfather was born in 1924. And if you do math and you know anything about basic history, you know that by the 1940s, he was a little bit occupied like the rest of the world was in the conflict of World War II. Why do I bring that up? Oh my gosh, Adam, is this going to be a history lesson? Well, my friends, this today is the story of my grandfather's most memorable drink, the most memorable adult beverage that he shared with another human being. And I thought this would be a fantastic way to kick off the series, Stories from the Driveway, because this is a story that I've heard retold countless times. And my grandfather loved to share it. When I'd go to visit him and we'd be sitting in front of the fireplace, when we'd be at a restaurant, the last conversation we ever shared together, he told this story again and again and again. And in the moment when I was younger, as he started to tell the story, I'd go, "Oh yeah, Gramps, your drink that you shared," and he'd just tell the story. And it took me a little while to kind of figure out he wanted to tell that story in its full capacity, the full story, so that he didn't forget it, so that it remained an important piece of his memories, and that most importantly, I think, I remembered it. So I've heard this story a million times. I hope by sharing it with you that it will have a deep impact for you. So we'll dive in just a second. Stories of my grandfather. Stories from the driveway. So 1944, the 94th Infantry Division is storming across Europe. Europe is facing troubled times. The 94th Infantry Division, under the command of General George Patton, is in sustained combat operations for 180 some odd days. They landed in Europe approximately 5 September 1944 and very quickly were involved in the conflict. My grandfather hated military life. He absolutely was just not a military kind of guy at all. He didn't like being told what to do. He didn't have an ability to keep his mouth shut. He didn't like having to do stuff he didn't like to do. And buddy, let me tell you, to his dying breath, he wanted to do it his way. So you can only imagine that several year period in the 1940s where he was not in charge and was being told what to do on a regular basis didn't go over well. So this young man in his 20s, I believe, 1920, thereabouts, is now engulfed in involved in this worldwide conflict. And as the 94th Infantry Division is moving across Germany and engaged in combat, he's part of that conflagration and hating every minute of it. Just not a military kind of guy at all. Plus, obviously, combat is not a fun thing. So here we are. We're now in Germany. We're somewhere in southern Germany. And they come into a town where the fighting, there's a brief pause in the fighting, and the division, has a day of rest, something like that. And as my grandfather and his friend, who he called Calhoun from the funny papers, as he called him, James Madison Chase from Rensselaer, New York. They were two peas in a pod. Neither one of them wanted to be in the army, and one got the other one to do more and more crazy stuff. And those two folks, as my grandfather liked to say, drove the sergeants crazy, drove them so nuts. In fact, one time my grandfather was on KP detail, kitchen detail, and was such an irritant to the sergeant that the KP sergeant told the first sergeant, "Don't ever send those two idiots over here again. Get rid of them." He just wore the sergeants down that bad. So all this fighting is taking place. A little brief pause in the fighting. And my grandfather and his buddy Calhoun are walking through the village, and they spot what my grandfather called an older woman. Now, my grandfather was 20, so this woman could have been 35. She could have been 85. Who knows? But to my grandfather, she was an older woman. War-torn area. You can imagine the scene. Tough times. And this older woman was out trying to gather some firewood to obviously go back in and build a fire in her house. And in the way my grandfather described it, it was really just sort of a sad looking, sort of grim pile of sticks more than firewood. But as the older woman gathered a pile of sticks, she put them in a basket and was struggling to carry the basket back to her house. And my grandfather and his friend Calhoun observed this. So my grandfather, being the man that he was, witnessing this older lady struggling, goes up and offers to help the woman carry her basket back to her house, her home, obviously damaged and, whatnot. So my grandfather and Calhoun and this German woman go to the house and deliver the firewood. And the German woman motions, "Stay here, stay here, stay here," goes into the home and comes back out shortly with a small platter, decorative platter, ornate design on it. 3 small silver glasses, small sort of decorative glasses with drinks in them. And she presents the tray to my grandfather. Now think of this scene. This is in war-torn Germany. This is at the height of World War II. This is 2 American soldiers and an elderly German woman. This is not a scene that you would then naturally say, "Oh yeah, let's have a drink." But she was so appreciative, she brought that tray out to them. And she had to motion, "Go ahead and drink." And she took the first drink to signal that it was okay, it wasn't poisoned, all those sorts of things. And my grandfather and Calhoun enjoyed a drink with the German woman. One of the officers came by, and as the way my grandfather tells the story, it was, sort of giving my grandfather lip for aiding and abetting the enemy. And my grandfather kind of gave him lip back. And then, but that wasn't really the point of the story. The point of the story is here in the height of the conflict, my grandfather had a human connection moment with another human being, and that other human being displayed their gratitude despite the outward appearance of 2 people that shouldn't be getting along. He shared that story, and this is sort of a brief telling. He had much more detail, much you could tell every time he told that story, he was reliving that moment, picturing every last detail. And as I shared earlier in the discussion here, he told me this story, the last conversation we ever had. It was that important to him. And one time I asked him, I said, well, geez, why did you, why did you do that? And wasn't there sort of some tension between you and the Germans? And my grandfather said, hey, listen, those young kids were doing what they were told. We were doing what we were told. We didn't know any better. It wasn't them necessarily. It was their leadership that had gone off the rails. And I don't want to get into a whole political discussion and history lesson, but it was clear that in that moment, in that place and time, in that interaction, all my grandfather cared about was helping somebody who was in need, having a bit of humanity, and sharing, and that individual sharing back a piece of humanity, despite all the situation, despite everything that surrounded it, despite all the reasons why they shouldn't be having that moment. This was like a 10-minute, 15-minute thing at the most. In 1944, he told the story again and again and again, all the way to late October 2021, to give you an idea of how much impact this interaction had on my grandfather. I hope by sharing this story, it gives you a little insight, a little snapshot into part of the character of my grandfather. He was an amazing man. In fact, many of the things you see on the wall behind me are memorials and memories of him. And I hope by sharing these stories from the driveway with you, you'll get a sense of him too. We had a deep, deep connection. He was flawed. He was not perfect. And I'll share some of those flaws and imperfections with you. But he had a lot of amazing, great qualities that I hope by sharing these stories will start to be clear to you as well. Hopefully, as we go throughout our day, we'll have a chance to connect human to human. We'll have a chance to connect. Even if the situation is, I'm on this side, you're on this side, we'll find a way to make that bond happen, to have that humanistic person-to-person interaction. In my grandfather's case, it was a story and a moment that lasted a lifetime. Maybe it could last a lifetime for us as well, to look past the differences.